The wind howled across the dry plains of Montana Territory, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and dust as the sun dipped low behind the jagged hills, painting the sky in strokes of orange and blood red. In the small town of Willow Creek, life was harsh, and kindness was a luxury few could afford. Among the ragged faces that walked its dirt streets was a girl named Clara Mayfield, no more than 16, her eyes the color of storm clouds and her hands calloused from sweeping floors at the saloon. She was an orphan, her parents taken by fever 2 winters past, and since then, she'd been surviving on scraps of work, a tin plate of stew, and the quiet mercy of strangers who pitied her just enough to keep her from starving. But though she had little, her heart held a fire that poverty couldn't quench, a stubborn light that refused to be dimmed by hardship or cruelty. And it was that very light that led her, one fateful evening, into the kind of trouble that would test the depth of her soul and change her life forever. It started near sunset when the town's main street was still busy with cowhands finishing their day's work, the sound of horses' hooves mixing with drunken laughter spilling out from the saloon. Clara was sweeping the wooden porch when she heard a commotion down the alley behind the general store, a scuffle, followed by a cry that wasn't just human but carried pain and fear in it. She dropped her broom and hurried toward the sound, her heart pounding. There, between 2 barrels, she saw 3 older boys, sons of ranchers, big for their age and mean from privilege, pushing and kicking a small native boy who couldn't have been older than 10. His dark hair was matted with dust, and his lip was bleeding as he tried to protect a small wooden carving clutched in his hand. "Savage thief!" one of the boys shouted, shoving him against the wall. "You don't belong here." Clara froze for a second, then something in her chest burned like wildfire. She didn't think, she just acted. "Leave him alone," she yelled, stepping between them. The boys sneered, taken aback that a skinny orphan girl would dare interrupt. "What's it to you, Clara?" one of them said, spitting on the ground. "He was stealing from Mr. Harlan's store." The native boy shook his head, tears streaking his dirty face. "I didn't steal," he whispered. "I was trading." Clara's eyes darted to the carving. It was a small horse, beautifully made. "He's telling the truth," she said, voice trembling but firm. "That carving's worth more than anything in that store." The boys laughed cruelly, circling her. "You gonna take the savage's side, orphan?" one taunted. "Maybe you're one of them." The words stung, but Clara stood tall, shielding the boy. "I don't care what you think," she said. "Right's right." One of the boys grabbed her arm, but she slapped him away, her eyes flashing like flint. "Touch me again, and I'll scream loud enough to bring every man out of that saloon," she threatened. For a moment, the boys hesitated, then muttered curses and scattered, leaving Clara with the frightened child. She knelt beside him. "It's all right now," she said softly. "You're safe." The boy clutched the carving tighter. "My name's Noka," he whispered. "It means traveler." Clara smiled faintly. "I'm Clara," she replied. "You got someone waiting for you." He nodded. "My father, Chief Wadenka. He's camped by the river. I came to trade for sugar." She glanced toward the distant woods, where the river shimmered in the fading light. "You shouldn't walk through town alone," she said gently. "People here, they don't understand." He looked down. "Father says not all whites are cruel." Clara felt her throat tighten. "Your father's a wise man." She tore a piece from her apron and wiped the blood from his lip. "Go home, Noka," she said, "before it gets dark." The boy hesitated, then pressed the wooden horse into her hand. "For you," he said shyly. "To remember a friend." Before she could protest, he ran off into the dusk, leaving her standing there with the carving, small and perfect in her palm. By morning, the whole town had heard what happened. Word spread like wildfire, how Clara Mayfield, the penniless orphan, had defended an Indian boy from the sons of respected ranchers. Some called her brave, most called her foolish. Mr. Harlan, the storekeeper, refused to let her sweep for him anymore, muttering that she was tainted by the savages. The saloon owner told her not to come back either, said customers didn't like the sight of her anymore. By noon, she'd lost both her jobs. The few people who used to nod at her now crossed the street to avoid her. Even the preacher's wife said softly, "You should have kept quiet, Clara. These things ain't for girls like you to meddle in." But Clara didn't regret it. She had done what her heart told her was right, and though she went to bed hungry that night, lying in the corner of the barn she rented for a few pennies a week, she held the wooden horse close to her chest and whispered a prayer that the boy had reached his father safely. The next morning dawned strange and still. The town awoke to silence, the kind that felt heavy, like the air before a storm. From her corner of the barn, Clara heard the first cries of alarm. Indians. Indians by the ridge. Men rushed for their rifles, women gathered their children. Sheriff Deacon rode down Main Street shouting orders. Dust rose in the distance like smoke, and soon everyone saw them, dozens of riders cresting the hill, their horses painted, their feathers catching the sunlight. There must have been 70 of them, moving in perfect silence, the ground trembling beneath their hooves. At their head rode a tall man in buckskin and beads, his face stern yet calm, Chief Wadenka. Beside him, on a small bay pony, rode Noka. The people of Willow Creek froze, fear turning their faces pale. They expected attack, revenge, blood. Instead, the warriors stopped at the edge of town, and the chief dismounted, walking slowly forward with Noka at his side. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and steady. "We come not for war," he said. "We come for thanks." Clara stood at the barn door, her heart pounding. Noka saw her first and ran forward. "Father, that's her," he cried, pointing. The chief turned his gaze toward Clara. "You defended my son," he said, when others would not. The townsfolk watched as he approached her. Clara bowed her head, unsure what to say. "I only did what was right," she murmured. The chief nodded. "Right is rare among your people," he said softly. Then he lifted a hand, and one by one, his warriors rode forward, laying gifts at her feet, blankets woven with sacred patterns, necklaces of turquoise and silver, pouches of dried meat and herbs. One placed a bow carved from ash wood, another laid down a pouch of gold dust. By the time the last warrior had finished, the ground before Clara shimmered with wealth beyond her wildest dreams. The townsfolk stared in disbelief. The chief spoke again. "You gave kindness without asking for reward. We give what we can to honor the spirit that lives in you." He turned to the townspeople, his voice rising. "You call my people savage, yet this child has more honor than all your men combined." With that, he and his warriors mounted their horses and rode away, leaving the town in stunned silence. For a long moment, no one moved. Clara stood trembling, tears streaming down her face. The gifts at her feet glittered in the sunlight, but all she could think of was Noka's smile as he waved goodbye from his pony. Then, slowly, the people began to murmur, first in confusion, then in awe. The preacher's wife fell to her knees, whispering, "The Lord works in mysterious ways." Mr. Harlan came stumbling forward, stammering apologies, offering to help manage her new fortune. But Clara only shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "You helped take everything from me. Now I'll build something better." And she did. Over the months that followed, Clara used the gold and gifts not for herself, but for others. She bought land by the river and built a small schoolhouse where white and native children could learn together. She hired widows to teach and paid the wages of poor mothers so their children could attend. When the town scoffed, she smiled and kept working. She built a small clinic next, run by a traveling doctor who treated anyone, regardless of race. People began to see her not as a foolish orphan, but as a young woman of courage and compassion. Some who had once shunned her now brought her bread and helped mend fences. The world did not change overnight, but it began to shift, one small act of kindness at a time. Years passed. Clara grew into a woman of quiet grace, her hair touched by sun and wind, her heart still fierce as ever. The wooden horse Noka had given her remained on her desk in the schoolhouse, a reminder of the day when compassion defied hatred and changed two lives forever. She never forgot the chief's words, "We give what we can to honor the spirit that lives in you." And in her own way, she passed that spirit on, teaching the children of Willow Creek not to fear what they didn't understand, but to look for the light in others. Decades later, when she was old and gray, travelers who passed through the valley spoke of a strange peace there, a place where once enemies now traded and laughed together, where children of all colors played under the same sun. And they said it all began with a poor orphan girl who stood up for a native boy, and the 70 warriors who showed that true wealth is not gold, but gratitude, honor, and love. And though the wind still howled across the plains, it now carried a different kind of song, one that whispered through the grass and echoed in the hills, "Kindness is stronger than fear. One heart can change a world." The wind howled across the barren plains of the Montana Territory, carrying dust and the scent of sagebrush as the sun melted into the horizon, setting the sky ablaze in orange and crimson hues. In the fading light, a young girl named Clara Mayfield stood sweeping the porch of the saloon, her hands blistered, her dress torn, and her heart weary but unbroken. She was 16, an orphan, and alone since fever had taken her parents 2 winters ago. Since then, She survived on scraps of work and the pity of strangers who tossed her coins for her labor. Yet, beneath her hunger and hardship lived a spirit too bright to be dimmed, a stubborn spark of goodness that the harshness of the frontier couldn't extinguish. That spark would soon lead her into an act of courage that would change her life forever. As the laughter of cowhands spilled from the saloon and the last of the horses' hooves faded down Main Street, Clara heard a sound from behind the general store, rough voices, a scuffle, and a small, pained cry that pierced through the evening air. Dropping her broom, she ran toward the noise. In the alley, she saw 3 older boys, sons of wealthy ranchers, kicking and shoving a small native boy, no older than 10, his lip bleeding, his dark hair matted with dust, and his small hands clutching a wooden horse. "Savage thief," one boy shouted, slamming him against the wall. "You don't belong here." Something inside Clara snapped. Without thinking, she darted forward and cried out, "Stop it! Leave him alone." The boys froze, surprised that a skinny orphan girl dared to interfere. "He was stealing from Mr. Harlan's store," one of them sneered. The boy shook his head, tears streaking his face. "I wasn't stealing," he said softly. "I was trading." Clara's eyes fell on the wooden horse, smooth, detailed, clearly handmade. "He's telling the truth," she said firmly. "That carving's worth more than anything in that store." The boys laughed cruelly. "You taking his side, orphan? Maybe you're one of them." Their words burned, but Clara stood her ground. "Right is right," she said, her voice shaking but steady. One grabbed her arm, but she pulled free, eyes blazing. "Touch me again, and I'll scream loud enough to bring every man out of that saloon." For a moment, they hesitated, then, muttering curses, they turned and walked off. The alley fell silent except for the sound of the boy's quiet sobs. Clara knelt beside him. "It's all right now," she said gently. "They're gone." The boy sniffled, looking up at her. "My name's Noka," he said shyly. "It means traveler." "I'm Clara," she said softly. "Do you have someone waiting for you?" He nodded. "My father, Chief Wadenka. We're camped by the river. I came to trade for sugar." Clara's heart ached. "You shouldn't walk through town alone," she told him. "People here, they don't understand." Noka looked down. "Father says not all white people are cruel." Clara smiled faintly. "He's right about that." She tore a strip from her apron and gently wiped the blood from his lip. "Go home, Noka, before it gets dark." The boy hesitated, then held out the small wooden horse. "For you," he said softly. "So you remember me." Before she could reply, he turned and ran into the dusk, his small figure fading into the glow of the setting sun. The next morning, word of what had happened spread across Willow Creek like wildfire. Some said Clara was brave. Others said she was foolish. Mr. Harlan, the storekeeper, called her a savage lover, and told her not to come near his shop again. The saloon owner said her presence would scare off paying customers. By noon, Clara had lost both her jobs. Those who once nodded politely now crossed the street to avoid her. Even the preacher's wife whispered, "You should have stayed quiet, dear. These things aren't for girls like you to meddle in." But Clara didn't regret it. That night, hungry and alone in the small barn she rented for a few pennies a week, she held the wooden horse close to her heart and prayed that Noka had made it home safely. Dawn broke strange and silent the next morning. The usual noise of the town was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. Then came the cry from the watchtower, "Indians! They're coming from the ridge." Panic spread like wildfire. Men grabbed rifles, women pulled their children inside. Sheriff Deacon rode down the main street, shouting orders, but fear drowned his voice. Dust rose in the distance, and then they saw them, warriors, dozens of them, cresting the ridge on painted horses. Their feathers caught the morning light, their faces unreadable. There must have been 70 in all, led by a tall man in buckskin and beads. Beside him, on a small bay pony, rode Noka. The townsfolk froze, waiting for the inevitable attack. But none came. The warriors stopped at the edge of town, silent as stone. The tall man dismounted and began walking forward with his son at his side. "We come not for war," he said in a deep, steady voice. "We come for thanks." The words rippled through the crowd. Clara stepped out of the barn, her heart pounding. Noka saw her and ran forward, pointing excitedly. "Father, that's her. That's the girl who helped me." The chief turned his gaze toward her, his eyes dark and thoughtful. "You defended my son," he said. "When others would not." Clara swallowed hard. "I only did what was right." Chief Wadenka nodded. "Right is rare among your people," he said softly. Then he raised his hand, and one by one, his warriors rode forward and placed gifts at her feet, blankets woven in sacred colors, necklaces of turquoise and silver, pouches of dried herbs, bows carved with intricate patterns, and small sacks of gold dust that shimmered in the sunlight. The ground before her glittered with riches beyond her wildest imagination. The townsfolk stared, speechless. The chief lifted his voice once more. You gave kindness without asking for reward. We give what we can to honor the spirit that lives in you. Then, turning to the crowd, his voice deepened. You call us savages, yet this child has shown more honor than all your men combined. With that, he and his warriors mounted their horses and rode away, leaving the town in stunned silence. For a long time, no one spoke. Clara stood trembling, tears rolling down her cheeks, staring at the mountain of gifts before her. The same people who had mocked her now stared with awe and shame. Mr. Harlan shuffled forward, hat in hand. Clara, he stammered, if you need help managing these treasures, she shook her head. You wouldn't help me when I had nothing. I'll manage now. And she did. Over the next months, Clara used her newfound wealth not for luxury but for change. She bought a small piece of land by the river and built a schoolhouse where both white and native children could learn side by side. She hired widows as teachers, paid fair wages, and made sure no child went hungry. When the townspeople scoffed, she kept working. When they mocked her, she smiled and carried on. Her kindness began to soften even the hardest hearts. Later, she used the rest of the gold to build a small clinic where anyone, no matter their color, could be treated. Slowly, the town began to change. Hate turned to respect, suspicion to friendship. People started calling her Miss Clara of the River, a woman of courage and grace. Years passed. Clara grew older, her hair silver and her hands rough from labor, but her spirit burned just as fiercely. On her desk in the schoolhouse sat the small wooden horse Noka had given her all those years ago. Sometimes, when children asked where it came from, she'd smile and say, it's a reminder that one act of kindness can change everything. Long after she passed, travelers spoke of a peaceful valley called Willow Creek, where once enemies now traded and laughed together, where the children of all tribes studied under the same roof. And they told the story of the poor orphan girl who defended a native boy, and how, the next day, 70 warriors made her rich, not just in gold, but in honor, love, and peace. Even now, when the wind sweeps across the plains, through the grass and over the river, it carries a whisper, the kind that lingers in the heart and refuses to fade. Kindness is stronger than fear, and one good heart can change the world.